Hey guys, welcome to a special episode of the B-Sides. Today we're doing it in video and we're doing a small debate between two friends of a long time between Duke and UNC. So let me first introduce you guys to Andy. Say hi, Andy.
Hello, hello.
Andy, who's the team you support?
I'm a Virginia Tech Hokie, but I mean, I root for the Duke Blue Devils in regard to basketball.
Okay, let's go. And on the other side, we have Mr. Jay. Jay, which team are you?
UNC Chapel Hill, Carolina Tar Heels.
Oh, let's go. All right. So today is going to be a friendly debate. I'm going to be less of an interviewer and more of a moderator this time. So we'll see how it goes and make sure to let us know how you guys think about this format. Maybe we'll continue doing in the future. But to begin with, I just wanted to ask you guys just a fairly simple question, and which is just how you became a fan of either UNC or Duke and what's been your favorite memory. So let's start with Andy.
I became a Duke fan like in the early to mid 90s. I mean, to be fair, yes, I am Northern Virginia born and raised, but like, I mean, what college am I supposed to cheer for, right? Like, I didn't go to college in fifth grade, right? So
That's true.
I was rooting for a team that was fairly successful at the time, but they were also a style of basketball that was fun to watch. They were always on TV. So I was like, okay, yeah, hey, this Duke Blue Devils thing, it part rebellion against my parents, like go Blue Devils, right?
Oh, yeah.
Also,
Hey,
like
this is a church podcast, Andy. Come on.
yeah, I was a big fan of Duke basketball just from elementary school on, just as a way of following college sports. But yeah, it was on TV. My favorite memory. Man, there's so many. But I think my favorite is probably the Miracle Minute. Duke against Maryland, down by 10 with right about 1 minute to go. Duke down by 10, wins
How do you come
in
back
overtime.
from 10 in a minute?
It's called being good at basketball.
I guess
As simple
so.
as that.
That doesn't
Shout
even
out Chip,
seem
but
realistic, honestly. That sounds like you made that up.
Asterisk.
I gotta look that up later.
Asterisk.
It's
All
called
right.
being good at basketball. What other way is there to win? You're good at basketball.
Yeah, that's true. It's either good or lucky, right? So, all right, thanks, Andy. Jay, what about you? How'd you become a fan, and what's your favorite memory?
So I actually grew up in North Carolina.
Okay.
I have a nexus to the state of North Carolina.
A little bit.
And growing up in there in the 90s, basketball is bigger than basketball. Like, it could be your neighbor, it could be your teacher, it could be anybody in the neighborhood. Everybody talked about basketball. It was always in the context of Chapel Hill, maybe NC State. No one growing up in Carolina ever talked about Duke because 85% of Duke students are out of state, right? So,
I didn't know that.
but I also knew, or I came to appreciate Carolina basketball in the mid 90s, probably like fourth or fifth grade is when I really embraced them. But it wasn't even just like a conscious decision. It was just a background cultural thing, right? So UNC
It's what you do.
is the default. And my favorite memory actually does involve this man right here and a couple of my friends, even though as soon as I met him in like 25 years ago.
25 years ago?
25 years ago, we were in 10th grade.
So we're at least 25.
Duke fan, UNC fan, and our other friend Chip is a Maryland fan. So we're all rivals. None of us went to these schools. But for my bachelor party, I think it was 2010 or 11.
Something like that.
Yeah, we went to the ACC tournament in Greensboro, North Carolina. And shout out to Andy, for that trip, he actually put on a shirt that I bought him that said Carolina is better than Duke.
Wow.
He took pictures with
That's
me.
a good friend. That's a good friend.
That's what I'm saying. So I mean, later on this debate, we'll get into some of the points
Okay,
why
sounds
you
good.
shouldn't ever be a Duke fan. But the bigger context is, we have a bond that's cuts deeper than that.
Sure,
So,
sure. That's great. That's
Shout out to
great hear.
Jesus
Yeah.
that brings us together.
Yes,
Enemies
sir.
are friends and brothers in the
Awesome,
gospel.
awesome.
Who won that tournament?
Which tournament? Oh, the ACC tournament.
Yeah, the one
Okay,
that we
we'll
went
get
to.
into it. We'll get into it.
I'm
All
genuinely
right.
asking.
So
I don't know.
another
I don't remember.
one more softball question, and then we'll get going. But I for the people especially who don't know college basketball, can you tell me a little bit about this rivalry? Why does it exist, and like where does it stem from? Either of you can answer honestly.
Absolutely. I think part of it is Duke and North Carolina, as kind of Jay mentioned, are two schools in North Carolina separated by about 8 miles. So, they're just really close to one another in proximity as well as just basketball dominance. And so I think just from a college point, right, it was just like you know, like it was kind of the prep boys of Duke versus the nitty gritty UNC, which is not true at all. But that was just the persona that was given off. But yeah, I think it stems from the fact that, again, they're 8 to 9 miles away from one another. And it's just obviously two basketball powerhouses. It's a rivalry, right? It's just like KCPC, CCPC.
No, edit that part out, man. No, it's nowhere near that. No, I would just add that, you know, within college sports, especially men's basketball, there's what's known as like blue bloods. UCLA, Kansas, Kentucky, and then UConn. I would say, well, maybe UConn, but
they are now
Carolina and Duke, right? But of all those schools, Carolina and Duke are the only schools that are not only in the same state, they play in the same conference.
Gotcha.
And they'll, like, every time there's a Carolina Duke game, you'll see it on the graphics. The lifetime record is like almost exactly 50.
Yeah, it's like almost
really
50-50.
It's like we won and lost like almost exact amount of times. Yeah. And historically, like ACC's a powerhouse, right? Yep. And the ACC, Carolina and Duke have won consistently. Like not just modern times or, you know, old times. So it's just, I think it's bigger than college basketball. The only other rivalry that probably people might mention in the same breath is like Ohio State, Michigan in football, or like Yankees, Red Sox. But but
like
there's
the elite of all sports, not just college basketball. I think just in general, like.
But especially now, I mean, I think you could safely say Carolina Duke is the greatest rivalry in all of sports, not just basketball, not just college basketball. At least in American sports, there seems to be a consensus.
Yeah, so that makes sense. That makes sense. Are there any traditions that kind of stem from this rivalry for either school, or is it mostly just like let's watch each other beat each other up kind of thing?
I'm not sure in terms of like.
Having not gone to these schools.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, no connection actually to any of these
been
schools.
to North Carolina maybe twice in my life, let alone. But really. I don't necessarily believe that there's anything other than kind of this, you know, academic competition as well as sports, right? It's not just basketball in terms of like how UNC looks at Duke and vice versa, but you know, I guess to relate it, it's Virginia Tech versus Virginia, right? Like it's in the same realm. It's not close, but like in the same realm, especially because Virginia Tech dominates UVA so much. So there's, you know, that's one versus like kind of what Jay was saying. I think not even just at like within the past like 3-4 years, it wasn't just that the records were the same. I think literally the points scored was like within like a couple points. Yeah. You know, like 3-4 points or something like that. I remember seeing a stat where it was just like they had like 15,300 and something versus 15,300 and something. Like it was like that level of like competitiveness.
Sure. Yeah. So that kind of ruins my second question, which is about historical success. Right. Because I guess they've kind of, they both won the same amount. Okay. So going into this question then, based on historical success for both these schools, which has the better longevity, which has the better peaks, or do they have both for your school? Let's start with Jay this time, actually.
Yeah. So no doubt for folks who are listening to this podcast who are only casual fans of basketball, let's say you were born in the 2000s.
Sure.
Duke for the last 10 years actually is a very likable program, likable players, easier to root for. And that gets into deeper issues that hopefully we can talk into about.
Sure.
You know, white players versus black players, one and done players versus, you know, like players who actually stay at school. But Duke has been extremely successful since the 90s. I would say like early 90s to now. I think only UConn has won more championships in that time.
Wow.
Duke has won all 5 of their championships since the 90s. Yeah, and
Dang.
UConn's won 6. But if you look at sustained success, like UNC has won 6 championships, dating from the 50s to the 80s to the 90s to the almost every, right?
Sure.
So modern basketball and classic basketball, we have both. And yeah, I think that record speaks for itself. Like UNC is tied right now with UConn for the most championships ever. Duke is tied with like Indiana with 5. UNC has 1 more. And then there's Kentucky and UCLA, but I think one of the few points that we'll probably agree is that those UCLA and Kentucky championships, they occurred like in the 50s and 60s and 70s when college basketball really wasn't.
Right.
Much less teams, much less competition, and a lot of shady things going on in terms of how to get players.
Sure, makes sense.
To stay at school and go to school and forgo the NBA. So.
Okay. Andy, do you agree?
Kind of. I think kind of what Jay was implying was, yeah, UNC I think has the past, right? Before, the 90s, UNC was the premier, right? I think it went UCLA and then it went to like UNC during that period. And then I think HOT said it best. Duke is the future. We are the future, right? Like,
HOT never said Duke is the future. HOT is a boy
We
band.
need to fact check this. Someone go fact check this.
But I think UNC, we were talking about how the records are kind of similar, like almost even. UNC had Duke in the beginning, but I think Duke is the present and the future in terms of, Duke is cool now, I think.
Debatable.
Debatable. But Duke has been a premier program for the past 30 years since Coach K has been there.
Sure.
Versus, yes, UNC had Dean Smith and Guthridge, and then I
Much
think
more than that.
there was that. Who was the Notre Dame coach after that? Like Matt Davis, something. Matt Doherty.
He was not good.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Versus Coach K has sustained for the past 30 years, and then John Shire taking over has picked up and hasn't lost a step. Right?
So UNC last won a championship in 2017. Duke last won a championship in 2015. So talking about Duke being the team of the future and present.
But overall, right? Like we could just talk, right? Like even last year, UNC was the number one team in preseason. Did they make the NCAA tournament?
I would just say this: Coach K has done a remarkable job.
Sure.
Right, but are we moving on to the next question, or is it naturally flowing? Because this is one of my points. Is that I think whether you look at corporate boards and CEOs, whether you look at pastors at churches, whether you look at political leaders, any kind of leadership, even more so than players, the number one quality of a great coach is you should be a leader, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the most defining characteristics of leadership is, are you able to replicate leadership and empower others?
Sure.
Or is it more of a personality-centered, personality cult kind of thing where the success is so closely tied to you that outside of you, there's no identifiable level of success? And to Coach K's credit, he won 5 championships.
You did.
And he built up a program. He took over Team USA. He made the smart decision to shift into actually recruiting one and done players, which changed the nature and likability of his program. But having said that, if you look at his coaching tree or even how his players have fared in the NBA, there's objective facts. UNC has multiple coaches in the Hall of Fame, not just the College Hall of Fame.
Right.
Naismith Hall of Fame for basketball in general. There's 3 coaches from UNC made it there, 4 players and 1 general manager. Right. And if you look at the Lakers, if you look at broadcasters, if you look at coaches, assistant coaches, players in college and NBA, that's not me or Andy debating. That's people who've done this for a living have enshrined them. If you look on the Duke side, only 1 coach has ever made it to the Basketball Hall of Fame. That's Grant Hill. And only 2 coaches, Coach K and Lefty Driesell, which is from the 1950s. And the NBA recently released a list of top 75 players in history. Mm-hmm. 4 UNC players were on that list. 0 Duke players were on that list.
Wow.
So I'm just saying, if you look at, and again, general manager, coaching, assistant coaching, players. If you look in the past 10 years, Kyrie Irving, Jason Tatum, you can't, or Zion Williamson, Duke is not only awesome, but they're likable.
Sure.
But if you look, we got to be fair with the 20 years before that, which I like to get into, which is why Duke is so unlikable. But after 2015, they've been very likable.
Sure.
Again, there's not necessarily much of a rebuttal, right? Like what Jay has saying. They are technically facts. But
technically, they are.
At the end of the day, how does that help UNC, right? We were talking about how Bill Guthridge, a person right after Dean Smith, how did he help UNC? Nothing. Matt Doherty, nothing. Roy Williams, hey, congratulations. You got 2 championships after, I don't know, creating fake classes at
3
UNC.
championships.
But essentially what I'm trying to say is, okay, all those things, all that tells me is that everyone had to leave UNC to be good.
Sure.
Versus John Shire, again, Sweet 16, his second year as a coach.
0 championships for John Shire.
This is his second year coaching.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. Hey,
Coach K has had Johnny Dawkins, Tommy Amaker, Quentin Snyder. They've all had decent success, but outside of people like us who really follow basketball, nobody knows them.
Yeah, I was about to say,
nobody knows
made up those names.
For anybody who follows basketball, right?
Yeah.
try these names. Larry Brown,
Sure.
who won several NBA championships as a coach and as a player, who coached Kansas, right? Another blue blood program that rivals UNC. Roy Williams, also who Dean Smith released and empowered to coach other schools and have success. Because Dean Smith,
all I'm hearing
I'm just
is
saying,
Kansas
he's empowered
made
people.
these coaches.
No, Mitch Kupchak, who won 7 NBA championships as an NBA GM for the Lakers. Anybody fans of like Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, Magic Johnson, Mitch Kupchak is the GM that put all of them together. Which GMs did Duke produce? Danny Ferry, one of the most unlikable players from the Duke family, who also had to resign from the Atlanta Hawks because of allegations of racism. So it just does not compare. Dean Smith as his leader. If you look at churches, who that have produced success, or companies, or any leaders, right? Great leaders are able to empower their disciples, and they free them to go work for other corporations, other rival churches, right? Because they care about leadership and reproducing that heritage. Sure. Coach K, he's been really good at making a name for himself, right? And he's used that, leverage that to improve his program. But all of his like Steve Wojciechowski, he didn't hand it off to Wojo, right? Coach K stayed there, I think, too long. And Sean Shire may end up being a great coach.
Coach K made it to the Final Four his final season.
No, I'm just saying, like you can hand off the baton and empower your assistant coaches who've been working with you for like 20 years. Anyway, Dean Smith did a good job of doing that. And that's why you have the Carolina tree and family, and you have widespread success that's been recognized by the Hall of Fame. Sure. Whereas Coach K is just Coach K and another coach who came way before Coach K, and then Grant Hill.
Sure. So actually, this was actually my next question. So it's interesting you guys brought this up. But just to frame what we're talking about right now, who was the more impactful coach in your guys' opinion, Coach K or Coach Dean Smith? And I guess for the audience, these would be probably the most well-known coaches for both your schools. Is that right? So you guys have talked a lot about it so far. But just to answer that question, what would you guys think, Andy? Do you have an answer?
I would say definitely Coach K, in the sense of, to be fair, I would give Dean Smith literally learned from the creator of basketball, right? Like, I think Dean Smith is from Kansas. I think he learned under James Naismith, literally the creator of basketball. Hey, wow. Congratulations. You sustained playing basketball on buckets. But what I think Coach K has done is, in every era, he coached from the 80s, 90s, 2000, 2010, and has sustained excellence in every phase of basketball, adapting to anything that has come, whether it is from the era of Johnny Dawkins, the era of Jason Williams, the era of JJ Redick, the era of Paolo Banchero. Duke's been able to, impact the game of basketball in a way that is more modern, more current. I will give it up. Yes, Dean Smith, congratulations. Your style of basketball was what they call the four corners, which was literally you park in four corners and pass the ball around until the score ends up being 4-2.
Was it effective?
I mean, I guess in a sense.
Let me be clear. If you just talk about X's and O's, like within the 4 lines of the court, like that kind of coaching, which is not what the primary job of a college head coach. But that, like, Coach K is like second to none. Like even when Coach K was still coaching and they were playing games against Roy Williams coach teams, Roy Williams would just focus on like athletic players and just run out at like track meets. But spacing, like pacing, Coach K is a master at maximizing his players and roster's strengths, right? They've won championships with teams that had no business winning championships because they always played the right way. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a term that's loaded with other meanings, which we'll get into. But in terms of what you see on the court, no, I mean, Coach K's definitely had a greater impact, right? He's a better, and Coach Team USA, managing all those egos of professional NBA players. So I respect Coach K a lot. Don't get me wrong, right? But that's not what people think of when you whether it's Pee Wee League or professional league. When you say the word coach, it's more than just X's and O's, right? But I wish UNC's players were coached like Duke players when Coach K was there, because Coach K maximized talent, spacing, 3-point shooting, running plays instead of just running up and down the court. And UNC could have won so many more games and more championships if they actually took it to a higher level of basketball. But it was too often just outrun people, outjump people, which was effective.
Sure.
But it wasn't maximum, like what Coach K has been able to do.
Gotcha. So talking about Coach Dean Smith, then, what are his accolades and how would he compare in your opinion?
So Coach Dean Smith is well known. Like North Carolina is a southern state, right? And we all know the history of this country, and the complicated history with race relations. And there was a time when certain laws were passed in the 60s, like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, that legally should have led to more level playing field and opportunities for players. But it wasn't really until influential coaches stood up and like began recruiting and platforming like players of color. And Dean Smith was one of the first ones who did that. And that just goes to what kind of, not only is he a great coach, he's a great, like he actually cares about his players and his coaches and his team staff. And so, that's like a documented fact as well. So I would say that's number one. And that's also a reason why I had a really hard time rooting for Duke or even enjoying sports where Duke was there, because I actually went to school, not in North Carolina, but I went to Georgetown University, which anybody who follows college basketball in the 80s, when modern basketball was taking prominence in the NBA, it was Lakers and Celtics, right? Lakers were exclusively, if not predominantly, an African-American team on the West Coast. Celtics were a lot of white players, and Boston is known to this day to be a lot of NBA players still say the fans in Boston are racist. But it was a black-white thing, right? And that was before the Jordan of the 90s. But in the 80s, Georgetown was like the icon of like the first African-American coach, a lot of African-American players. And Coach K started kind of, I don't know, intentionally or knowingly or toleratingly, for some reason, started recruiting, kind of going against that way. And a lot of his players, if you look at their rosters from the 80s to the 90s, 2000 until 2015, when he switched over to one and dones, and I'll get into this later. Like Duke is a great university. They have a children's hospital. I know several players from Duke. Kids who actually went to Duke. If my son got into Duke, I would happily send him.
Sure.
And the founder of Duke donated money to a lot of African-American communities that gave rise to, what's known as the Black Wall Street in Durham. So I'm not saying like what I'm about to say now is facts, right? In terms of like racial insensitivities, but the optics just wasn't great. You had a team emerge in the 80s that was like disproportionately white, and it stayed that way for like several decades, consistently beating teams that minority communities rallied around as an escape from the racial disparities they saw in real life. Sports is supposed to be an escape, but they started beating Georgetown. They started beating UNLV with Larry Johnson. They beat Michigan Fab Five, right? And so it just didn't leave a good taste in the mouth when it's like Duke is already a privileged institution where 85% of the students is out of state. The tuition now is like $62,000, whereas UNC tuition is $9,000. And UNC is, is elitist too. Don't get me wrong. But just the optics, sports is what unites a lot of people in this country. Unfortunately, it's not churches. It's sports. People go to sports for that. But whenever I turned the game, it just wasn't an escape for me. It just reminded me, right, of some of those inequities, having grown up in communities where, whether it's DC or Fayetteville or Lumberton, like Vienna is the first city that I've lived in where it's like a white majority and Asians are the second. But every other city I've lived in before my life, except outside of Korea, it was either African-American majority or Native American majority. And there was like 3% Asians, and the whites were the minority, right? So just from that background, when I turned on sports, it just seemed curious. Like, at least in basketball, professional level, collegiate level, you see a certain mix of players on the court. Like, never any Asian people, but a lot of black players and some white players. But whenever you saw Duke, it was just like, well, there are a lot of white kids on that team. And they're so proud of their image and they leaned into it, right? And it's not my words. I got quotes here from black professors who work at Duke who didn't like the Duke basketball team until they uncovered some history and, found out what the facts were about Duke's, admirable history. But the optics wasn't great,
Sure. Yeah.
It just was hard to root for Duke. You really had to go out of your way to root for Duke until 2015.
And do you agree? That was a lot of
I could imagine how Jay was thinking that in the 80s when he was 4. Yeah, no,
I said I didn't.
That makes a lot of sense.
I didn't become a fan until the mid 90s. And you remember what the Duke teams were like, right? Danny Ferry,
Shane
Christian
Battier.
Lane. That I said mid 90s. Shane Battier and those teams when they played against UConn in the late 90s.
Grant Hill.
All right.
Elton Brand.
Again, late 90s. That was the one team from the pre 2015 era that I actually
Johnny
liked.
Dawkins.
I actually rooted for Duke when they played against UConn because it was Trajan Langdon, William Avery, Elton Brand, right?
Corey Maggette.
Yeah, and again, that was an anomaly, right? You had, but then honestly, like it's just like the first thought I always had.
I think it was that their star players happened to be white, but I don't think that that's necessarily a fair assessment to say simply that Duke was full of white dudes.
Before 2013, more than half of the players on the Duke rosters were white. Whereas collegiate basketball D1 level, that's not proportionate to the level. I mean, I'm not saying people.
So are you implying that it was a racial thing that Coach K?
No, it's not. It's just that I don't think Coach K intentionally went out of his way to do that. But at some point, people started associating them with that. And that happened early. That happened early when they started being Georgetown, UNLV, Michigan Fab Five, right? And people started, other black players started accusing black players who played for Duke as Uncle Toms. It got really nasty, and it wasn't fair. It wasn't accurate.
Right.
But Duke, Coach K on down, they were aware of that branding issue, right? And they decided to lean into it, and they continued to recruit highly unlikable players who happen to be like Grayson Allen, JJ Redick, Kyle Singler, Josh McRoberts, Greg Paulus, John Shire. Like, it's just like no other school that I know that is at that level has that. And I'm not saying it's like intentional, but like they chose to lean into it, and it's just optically insensitive or obtuse, I would say at best. But then Coach K came around. He was like, wait a minute, this is not serving my my university well. So once he started coaching Team USA, he started getting that street cred, for lack of a better word. And in 2015, he was like, forget this facade of student athlete, right? NCAA as a whole, Division I sports is not student athlete. It's athletes making free money, free labor, making a lot of money for universities. And Coach K said, forget it. I'm going to outcompete John Calipari at his game. And he started recruiting just the best players available, looking at just talent alone, not looking at whether they're going to actually stay in school. And that's when his teams coincidentally ended up being more representational of the actual basketball playing population who play at a high level. And all of those players left for the NBA after their first year. But they're also like highly likable, highly skilled, one of the best ever players. And they are the future. Kyrie Irving, Jason Tatum, Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson. Even they're like middle of the pack road players from that generation, like Tyus Jones. He's a solid player. Like, I like almost every Duke, like even the bust, like Jahlil Okafor, Wendell Carter. All those players probably should have gone to other schools because their draft stock decreased because they played with other 5-star recruits. Whereas if you look at Kentucky, like almost all the players that were highly recruited,
kind of thing,
they did really well in the NBA.
That is not true at all.
So Coach K has not done. He's not the best like one and done coach either. You know what I mean? If you think about it, even if
I believe that he is the best one and done coach, more so than Calipari. Yeah, absolutely.
Can you define a one and done coach for the audience?
A one and done is
Kentucky
coming into
Duke.
college. The NBA made that rule where, I think maybe about 2004, 2005, they made a rule where you had to be 1 year out of high school to be eligible to enter the draft or be 19 years old.
Yes.
And so what a lot of colleges, a lot of players before then, right? Like 2004, I think Dwight Howard, Sebastian Telfair were like guys that came straight out of high school. And they were the last class before, but used to come straight out of high school, go. What that NBA rule basically allowed was for these high school kids, they have to go out of high school, right? Like 1 year out of high school. So they would go to college for 1 year and then go to the NBA, right? And so like that became known as the one and done.
And
era.
before that, you had a lot of even like the best players in basketball, like Jason Williams, Elton Brand, all these like Duke players that did well in the NBA. They actually stayed in college for multiple years,
right?
At least half of it, like at least 2 years. Michael Jordan, like James Worthy, like these superstars, Allen Iverson, right?
Yep.
They could have gone straight probably from high school. But after that rule was implemented, it wasn't like a facade anymore. It was just like a token year at any school and just to go straight to the NBA. So the highly sought after 5-star recruits in high school said, what school will give me the best chance to get on a lot of nationally televised games?
Right.
Give me enough playing time at my position without another 5-star recruit competing with my playing time. And then what will allow me to like make a difference for my family, making generational wealth, playing basketball professionally. And Kentucky really like was the pioneer with John Calipari, which he's a sketch character, right? Right? He's nowhere near the Dean Smith or, Coach K level of anyway. But one thing he did well, if you look at who's the best coach that played that game, that leveraged that rule for the benefit of the university and their players, Coach K is very high up there. But if you look at Kentucky alumni in the NBA right now and Duke alumni in the NBA, I mean, objectively speaking, Kentucky has not only more players, but better players who have succeeded. Whereas Duke, half their players have hit, but a lot of their players have kind of washed out. And it started in college because everybody went to Duke.
Right.
And they couldn't get enough playing time, and they were competing with other 5-star recruits at their position. So Coach K did a marvelous job, but he wasn't even the best at that.
Well, I would say in the sense of, yes, gathering NBA talent, Kentucky, absolutely. Like Jade mentioned, great talent in the NBA right now from Kentucky players. But in terms of leveraging that success in the college level, I think Coach K is the absolute best in that regard.
How many championships has Duke won since that rule?
One.
And Kentucky's won one too.
Absolutely. With far more better NBA talent, as you were saying.
I don't know about
so
that.
in that sense, I think
At
Coach
the
K
college
has been
level,
more
they won.
consistent. You can look at Coach Calipari even the past 5 years, right? Which is why he
That's true.
basically got fired from Kentucky,
he did.
right? Like he hasn't made it past the first weekend,
Yeah.
right? Versus Coach K has had a sustained level of excellence in terms of, even with these one and dones, changing where you have to get this talent, like in college basketball now. Coach K has been able to turn a program, for better or for worse, where he heavily relied on seniors and juniors,
4-year players
who
who would never play in the NBA or maybe be
who
a very
will be bench players in
Yeah.
the NBA possibly, to recruiting players who are one and done, and still being able to have a long-term success, adapting to what the rest of the college world was going through. I would say Coach K has done a much better job than John Calipari has.
I would agree. Yeah.
John Calipari has probably done the least with the most. Versus Coach K, you could say he's done well with having great players.
Yeah, and the significance for the purpose of this discussion is that used to be the biggest point that was used against UNC before 2015, right? UNC did not recruit one and done players, but a lot of players who would have fit that demographic considered going to UNC, and a lot of our players were known as players who relied on athleticism, that were just recruited just to run up and down the court, knowing that they'll go to the NBA. Whereas Duke, we have student athletes, right? They have high GPAs. Right, they're scholar athletes, and they're actually true college students. So, being a fan of this game for so long, following these two schools, it's been interesting to note how certain arguments were used to undermine the very same thing that Coach K is doing now and been the best at, according to Duke and according to Andy. I would say he's been the second best. UNC was accused of doing that thing, but it was viewed in a negative light. Right. So I'm just saying, like, the discussion has changed and the standards have changed.
Right. Actually, now that you mentioned, is there a certain type of basketball that UNC and Duke play individually as schools, or has that evolved during the years? What are they known for as schools in their conference?
I mean, kind of like what we were talking about, how Dean Smith kind of sustained excellence through what we call the four corners. Coach K, at least in the collegiate level, as well as through the USA basketball, kind of made positionless basketball more mainstream. I think there were very few colleges that were like, I think Villanova was known for their 4 guards and 1 big man. But what Coach K did was, hey, like, whoever gets the ball can bring it up. There's no set, like, shooting guard, small forward, power forward. It's just, hey, play basketball, play it well, flow, be adaptive, be, good at more than simply just one role. Sure. Like a power forward, like, has a specific role. Coach K got rid of that and just recruited players who can play basketball. And I think that accelerated, and that's part of why, and because also, like, that's what the NBA is turning into now. You're seeing that now. He was able to adapt to that and bring a style of basketball that was successful collegiately, but also helped you prepare for the NBA.
Yeah. No doubt. I mean, in terms of maximizing on-court talent, like, Coach K was very good, better than any UNC coach. And I just like the way they play on the court.
Sure.
And also from the stories that I read about, from former Duke players about how Coach K was like a fiery competitor, right? I love that. Like competition is great. I love that he wanted to win, right? So like in that lane, I mean, I have all the respect in the world for Coach K, but I judge it from a broader perspective.
Sure.
Right? So,
yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, I think we exhausted that topic to death. Although I'm sure we could go into it for years on.
Are you going to
right?
ask about, now that you've asked about coaching, can you ask about best players?
Oh, that was my next question. Okay, so my next question was, which college has produced the best NBA players? And from what it seems like they're talking about, with Duke being the more, I guess they use the most out of everyone they have. Seems like I would guess that UNC.
Since I've deferred to Andy on a lot of these topics, can I get the opening argument here? So this is a broader question about college sports, right? And is it a chicken or egg question?
Sure.
Right? How much do colleges actually contribute to the development of these players once they get there versus these players were great to begin with, and so they self-select Kentucky or Duke or back in the day Carolina as the gateway to the NBA, right?
Sure.
And especially in the one and done era, I don't think anyone can argue, whether it's Kentucky or Duke or Carolina or any of these schools, that these players develop in college, right? These players, one of them players, they don't even stay a full year. It's like maybe the basketball season and maybe training camp. It's probably like 8 months on campus. And they already come with like professional trainers. They play AAU, right? And you can tell because a lot of these players who graduated from Duke or Kentucky, when they get into the NBA, they have a lot of bad habits, right? So you can't blame that on Duke either. But like Zion Williamson should be taking care of his weight.
Yeah.
Kyrie had a lot of off the court, whatever, right? But so I don't think you can really say, these schools really contributed to the players' quality from like the one and done perspective. You really have to go back to before the one and done era, right? Where players actually spent enough time in the program to actually learn and be affected by the coaches, by the players, right? But to keep it short, even people who don't know basketball, right? You might have heard about Coach K, and you might think there's an arguable debate about who's the best college coach ever,
sure,
or the best coach ever, right? You might think Coach K, you might think Wooden, you might think Dean Smith, Bobby Knight, you might think Bill Belichick, if you just talk about sports in general,
right?
But if you talk about the best basketball player ever, maybe the best athlete ever, right? There's much
LeBron
more.
James didn't go to college.
Consensus. But who is the standard that LeBron is always
That's our next
compared
debate,
against?
by the way.
Who is the standard that LeBron is always compared against?
Magic Johnson?
We all know, right? I mean, Andy Kim himself has worn like clothes, shorts, shoes, hats, jerseys bearing this man's image, right? And I'm not even the biggest Michael Jordan fan. I actually was not a Jordan fan in the 90s.
Really?
But there is but that's a fact, right? Jordan is the GOAT player.
Sure.
And he is the standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Coach K is probably arguably the greatest coach in NBA or NCAA history, but there's more room to argue there. When it comes to the best player, Jordan is best ever, and there's a greater level of consensus around that. I would actually probably say LeBron's, I don't know. There's an argument can be made.
1A, 1B?
But let's also look at, forget Jordan. That's too easy, right? You can't just rely on Coach K or one person to make a program. My whole thing is look at NBA players who succeeded and won championships.
Sure.
Not just the star players, which you could argue Vince Carter, Antoine Jamison, Rasheed Wallace, all these players. Look at the championship teams and how many NBA players from Duke or Carolina have actually contributed to winning. Mm-hmm. For Duke, let me give credit to Shane Battier. He's won 2 championships. He won that with LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh, the Miami Heatles, right? So, but outside of Shane Battier, I'm not missing anybody who's won like championships as an NBA player and like meaningfully contributed as a Duke alumnus?
No, not yet.
All right, so let me run down the list of UNC. All right, yes. Danny Green, who's won championships with 3 separate teams, San Antonio Spurs, Toronto Raptors, and the Los Angeles Lakers, right? James Worthy, who's one of the Carolina alumni who made the Hall of Fame with the Showtime Lakers. He was the 3rd best player next to Kareem and Magic. Rick Fox, people don't know, who won a lot of championships with the Shaq and Kobe. There's usually a UNC player, right? Not to mention the coach and the GM, right? So I'm just saying, like, if you talk about sustainable careers where people make money and achieve a level of success, like Carolina has that. But if it comes to star power, like now, like Duke and Kentucky take the cake.
Sure.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
No.
Right. And to be fair, I think that that's probably more relevant to
But again, is that because of
our
Duke?
era, right? Like
Or is that
UNC's
because they could have gone to Kentucky? Any other schools? Kyrie Irving would have been a star no matter what school he went to.
No, fair enough.
Jason
But
Tatum, the same
Kyrie
thing.
Irving didn't. He wasn't a consensus number one pick when he came. If anything, I think it was a guy named Harrison Barnes. What happened to that guy?
Oh, thank you. Harrison Barnes, another UNC alum who won a championship with the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah, a guy who came in as the next Michael Jordan and had to stay for 2 years because he just was not good.
Nobody outside of you is aware of that, right? I'm just saying. You're adding to my argument, right? Meaningful players who are making a living, long career in the NBA, winning championships and contributing as a starter on the Golden State were Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Andre Iguodala, Draymond Green, and Harrison Barnes was known as the death lineup, right? The only reason why Harrison Barnes is forgotten is, you know who took Harrison Barnes' spot? Kevin Durant, all right? So Harrison Barnes filled in Kevin Durant's spot, and he was the first team of the Warriors who won the championship, right? That's a UNC product right there. So there's too many I forget to mention, right? But Andy's helping me out.
Again, if we're talking about, before we were born, sure. Absolutely.
Harrison
Michael
Barnes?
Jordan.
2000.
Okay, you're naming Harrison Barnes.
Michael
but
Jordan
then for
was played
every
in the
Harrison
90s.
Barnes, there's, again, star players that will eventually. Jason Tatum is part of a contender. These guys are now parts of contenders. Zion Williamson, Pelicans are a contender.
Conditionals. I'm talking about historical facts, right? What's in the record now that
No, fair enough.
everybody
I will give you
who
that.
watches basketball has recognized.
But also then even for someone like Michael Jordan, who has been, like you were mentioning, I wear
I don't
Team
like
Jordan.
Jordan. I don't like Jordan. Don't get me wrong.
right?
I don't like him as a person.
No, regardless, right? Even Michael Jordan as a owner of a sports brand.
Now we're talking about
How many?
owners.
I'm just saying, how many Duke players are on Team Jordan versus not?
Probably a lot.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. In terms of talent wise, we are now seeing in this new era.
Once again, post 2015 is a totally different discussion.
Sure.
Those Kyrie Irving, Jason Tatum, Zion Williamson
2010
could have gone straight from high school and they would be exactly where they are now.
I would say
players like Jahlil Okafor, Wendell Carter, Marvin Bagley probably would have done better if they hadn't gone to Duke, right? The only players that
they went and averaged 2010.
Let me finish. Post 2015 era, the only player that I can think of that actually benefited from staying at Duke and Duke actually had a meaningful impact on his game, who's like Tyus Jones. I love Tyus Jones. Floor general.
One and done.
But I know, but he actually played at Duke, and I don't know. I think he benefited from playing at Duke. He wasn't very well known before. He wasn't the top of his class or even on that roster.
He was the top point guard prospect.
But he wasn't the most famous player on that roster.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah,
Exactly.
because you had to play with Jahlil Okafor.
So playing with no competition at his position, playing with Jahlil Okafor and Justice Winslow, another washout. Tyus Jones benefited, but most of the players who took Coach K's allures and recruited, right, turned down other recruiting offers and went to Coach K's program only to face other competitors at the same position in the same draft class. Half of those people, I think, was disservice. But a lot of them have had success, but you can't really count on that as your argument because Duke didn't contribute to their success. Aside from being
I think someone
TV.
like Mason Plumlee and Miles Plumlee are prime examples of players who came in.
That was before 2015.
Very raw. Yeah.
Mason Plumlee, Miles Plumlee, the other Plumlee.
Plumlee.
That supports my argument, what I was saying earlier about a disproportionate number of greatly skilled, respectable, good people. But again,
who maximized their potential.
I'm just saying, Caucasian players.
Versus, again, you look at UNC, who
just
has
disproportionate.
I think UNC has had plenty of 5 stars who have not panned out versus
and
Duke.
I've conceded that point.
Right. And you're just saying from the past 10 years. I could say for the past 20 years, they have not maximized.
I completely agree. That's one of the biggest frustrations of being a UNC fan. But what we have not done is we have not recruited high-level players, 5 stars, NBA prospects at the same position, at the same class to compete with each other, telling them and their families that if you come to our school, you have the best chance to go to the NBA. Right?
They absolutely do.
Coach Calipari has done a better job of making that promise strictly transactional.
That's where I disagree.
You spend 1 year at Kentucky. Okay, let's do this.
There's been so many players.
Let's do this.
Sure. The
Kentucky NBA players right now versus Duke NBA players right now. Who would win?
Look, absolutely. They are top heavy with the level of talent.
Not
Kentucky's
top heavy.
But Kentucky has had 5-star players at every position and only one or two.
Let's go down the list. Let's go down the list. Jamal Murray.
Okay.
De'Aaron Fox.
Okay.
Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Anthony Davis. Carl Anthony Towns. There's your starting 5. Let's go to the bench. Tyler Hero. Malik Monk. How many other players are there? Who am I missing?
At Kentucky, I mean, it's John Wall,
Julius Randle,
DeMarcus.
John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Julius Randle.
But then
was
for every
like-
one of
I
those,
agree.
there's Eric Bledsoe, there's Aaron and
Eric
Andrew.
Bledsoe was playing in the NBA for 10 years.
He was
terrible, though.
He was
He was terrible.
he was ranked almost as high as John Wall.
He was terrible.
Yeah, regardless, like you talk about the Harrison twins, you talk about even right now Aaron Bradshaw.
Yeah, but
You can talk about
That's
Justin
like-
Edwards.
but none of those, they weren't on the level. And then
They were 5-star
So I'm just
players.
saying that roster. I'm not even mentioning like John Wall or DeMarcus Cousins. They're out of the league. But current NBA players from Kentucky versus current NBA players from Duke, who would win?
Duke,
Really? Name your 8 rotation.
Kyrie Irving, Zion Williamson, Jason Tatum.
Who's okay? Bam Adebayo is going to guard Zion Williamson. Bam has the head lead over there. Kyrie is probably the most offensively talented player, but who's going? He's going to go against Shea, who's 6'7". Jamal Murray, NBA champion. De'Aaron Fox is also like 6'5", 6'7". Who's going to guard those guards? Who's gonna play
Anyone. Again,
defense?
Duke has positionless basketball.
Who?
They can have their Jason Tatum can guard any of those guys. Zion Williamson, can
Anthony
guard any of
Davis,
those
Karl
guys.
Anthony Towns, Tyler Hero.
Yeah, why
Malik
not?
Monk.
If Coach K is coaching, I have no doubt in my mind.
Coach. I'm just saying, Kentucky. Most objective third-party observers would probably take Kentucky's roster over Duke's because Zion's not reliable. Kyrie, when he's on the court, he's probably the best ever, like most skilled player ever, one of my favorite players, right? But he's like available and then not available. Jason Tatum is probably your best prospect, right? But this year, at least in the NBA, Shea probably has a stronger case for MVP than Jason Tatum, right?
I'll give him that. Yeah,
De'Aaron
sure.
Fox and multiple championships. Jamal Murray's won the championship. Anthony Davis.
But again,
won the
this
championship.
goes
Bam
into
Adebayo.
this goes into the conversation of sure, where Calipari gets, it's a spray and pray for him essentially because he gets like.
My point is not that Calipari is better than Krzyzewski. My point is,
I understand that.
Kentucky players and Duke players who are in the NBA who are one and done, they would have succeeded whether they went to Duke or Kentucky or USC or UCLA, any Division I high profile program. They would have had the exact same level.
I
of
would
success.
argue that there's more
Duke did
five
not
stars
do anything
who maximized their potential at Duke than Kentucky.
None of those.
is my argument.
None of those players won a championship at Duke, right?
Who?
All the NBA players that I just mentioned.
Who did you mention? I don't remember.
All the top NBA players. Jason Tatum did not win a championship.
Sure.
Kyrie Irving did not win a championship.
Yeah.
Zion Williamson did not win a championship. The only team that won a championship was the 2015 team.
Okay, then
Jaleel
you can say that,
Okafor,
but like, yeah,
But Kentucky's
Anthony
2012 team
Davis,
won. Yeah,
yes.
they won a championship.
right.
So they had success at the college level. I'm just saying, you can't count on these modern players as the credit to Duke because they technically went to Duke, but they stayed there for like 4, 5, 6 months, and Duke didn't do much. I would say Duke benefited more from these players by continually raising the profile of this program and buying more credibility.
I mean, that's why they go to Duke.
Non-white community to say we can actually root for Duke, right? And because they're like cool now. No, I can read you articles from black journalists, black professors, and black NBA players saying this. 2019, it became more acceptable, and now apparently, the population level, the popularity level that Duke enjoys is higher among the black community than the general American community as of like 2019 or so. And that's directly a result of seeing more black players on the team, which I think is common sense, right? But you can't say those players benefited. Duke benefited much more from those players being on campus than them being on. And that's not the way it should be.
Sure.
That's not the way it should be, right? Because these players don't even get paid, right? Duke makes a lot of money. UNC makes a lot of money. Colleges make a lot of money off of these players, right? And so, I mean, that's just, you cannot say Duke contributed to their success more than the other way around. So, I mean, I don't think you can really count on one
Grayson
of them players.
Allen.
Well, before people think we're this is a Kentucky versus Duke debate, can you guys just name me 5 players in Duke and UNC who are in the NBA right now who people might
Maybe right now. That's
Okay,
cherry
maybe-
picking it. Go ahead.
I mean, it is right. Yeah,
All right,
but,
go ahead.
but people, if you're still
I
watching
mean,
TV,
that's Duke. That's obviously Duke.
sure.
Right. I mean, I think we named Kyrie Irving. We named Jason Tatum, Zion Williamson.
Brandon Ingram.
There's Brandon Ingram. There's who else is in the NBA right now? Derek Lively, Mark Williams.
I like Lively.
Yeah, I love those guys. I mean, they're like, I think I want to say though, I think part of it is it's fun watching Duke play now, but I do miss those 3 to 4 year players. I miss Quinn Cook,
Sure.
like being
He was
in
the first
NBA.
of that one
right?
team.
No, well, yeah, but he was a senior at the time,
Yeah.
right? And so like I remember that Duke team. I love that 2015 team. I think Quinn Cook is one of my favorite Duke players of all time, right? Like, and it's unfortunate that he's been up and down in the NBA.
He won a
but-
championship with the Lakers. Right?
contributing player.
Yeah, he was.
For
Contributing player.
maybe the Warriors as well.
I think so.
Yeah,
I don't know if he won with them
so-
though.
I think he might have.
He might have.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean,
And so and UNC doesn't have that many right now.
No, our players, we have Cole Anthony,
Okay.
Kobe White. We have a lot of like Cam Johnson, like not quite all-stars, but like
Sure.
serviceable players. I think Kobe White might be most improved player.
improved player of the year.
Undersized guards who outplay their roles.
He was a 5-star. Don't
Nasir Little, Portland Trail
another
Blazers.
5-star player.
Anyway,
yeah.
I mean, if you look at present day right now, it's cherry picking, but there's no competition
Sure.
between
Yeah.
Duke and UNC.
Yeah. Fair enough.
But if you look historically, right, I just mentioned names. And Vince Carter, Antoine Jameson, Rasheed Wallace, Jerry Stackhouse, James Worthy, Sam Perkins, right? People who watch basketball who weren't born now would understand.
20 years ago. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm just saying.
absolutely.
I'm just saying.
Fair enough. You know what? I think we're gonna have to start to wrap up because this has been great, but you guys can talk for a couple of hours after this. But second to last question, which would be, who do you think has a better future, and who's gonna come out on top next year?
Oh, I mean, come on. Like Duke's future, I think, again, as they've adapted to the NIL and all these things that are honestly, I think, ruining college basketball.
No.
I think the NIL is
I didn't want to get
horrible.
into that, but I don't think we have time today.
But I think Duke has adapted better. I think, and Duke is better set up for the future. There's a man named Cooper Flagg coming in next year that's supposed to be
From this great state of Maine,
the main
the
event.
whitest state.
Oh, okay,
in
then
the
you can
country.
put it. You can put in a guy named Kaman Maluach,
Yeah, number
who
two.
is a top 3 NBA prospect as well.
I'm just saying.
On top of, look,
Let me
Duke
just be
just
clear.
gets
Let
really
me just
good
be clear.
players.
Like I don't think like Duke is more whatever than any other school, right? Despite what I said, I'm just talking about optics, right?
Sure.
Why it's hard to root for Duke, right?
Yeah.
And why it's much easier to root for Duke now, right? But if like my son got into Duke, I would probably send him there. If my daughter, right? And if I had like people who play basketball that I knew and they got recruited by a Duke program, I would send them, right? I'm just saying. I know people from Duke that I love and respect. I don't want people to get the wrong idea. But you asked me like, why is it hard for me and why is it hard for most people who didn't go to Duke? If you went to Duke, more power to you, man, right? But if you don't have a connection to Duke, right, you're definitely out of state. You paid a higher tuition and maybe you like the brand of basketball, but at least in the 90s and the 2000s and until the middle of last decade, it was unnatural, right? It was kind of ununderstandable. You really had to go out of your way to like root for Duke,
Sure.
right?
Sure. But
Most
would you say
people-
right now that Duke has the edge.
Yes, I know.
Okay,
Duke
fair enough.
has the edge going forward as well.
I don't know about going forward, man. I don't know. You can't tell about the future. I don't know.
That's true.
Yeah.
Anything can change.
But yeah, anything
So
can
far,
change,
UNC
but,
is ahead by any objective measure.
Yeah,
More
from
championships,
just
more
weighing
wins.
so heavily on the past. Yeah,
No, it's-
absolutely.
2017 is when we won our last championship. 2009, 2005. Those were all, we won 3 championships in the 2000s.
Yeah, but also,
How many championships
I didn't
has
want to
Duke won
bring
in the
this up so
2000s?
many times, but there was a man named Rashad McCants, a player from
for
UNC,
every
who has
Rashad
claimed.
McCants and every George Karl, which are the worst products out of UNC, there's a Danny Ferry, who I just talked about earlier, right? Danny Ferry, right? And there's the Dante Joneses, there's the Grayson Allen. So I don't want to pick on in any debate or argument. You don't want to pick the highest cherry picking
Sure.
or the worst. You got to look at the whole picture. You don't want to look at just this decade or decade. Look at the whole totality of circumstances.
Yeah.
Evaluate the evidence, and people will take away from it from what they take away from it. Right?
I mean, again, like, yes, Duke is heavily reliant on Coach K, but I think the impact of Coach K will go far beyond what Dean Smith had done in terms of, like, even his proteges, right? Larry Brown, I remember, I think it was 2000 and what year was that? 2008, 2000. Larry Brown took a team to the Olympics. We used to dominate, right? The dream team and
2008. That's Redeem Team. That's
no,
Coach K.
oh yeah, 2004 then, when they lost to
The bronze?
Argentina or
yeah.
Greece,
Yeah.
or Puerto Rico, I forget. Yeah,
Yeah.
Larry Brown was coaching that team.
Okay, that's Olympics.
You know what? And
Larry
then
Brown's in
guess
the-
who? Larry Brown,
Hall
one
of
the-
Fame as a
right.
coach.
And then and then guess
You
who
talking
they
about
had?
one of
Guess
the-
who they had to come and save the day?
Let's
A
end on
man
a high
named
note.
Mike
Let me
Krzyzewski.
let me end on a high note. There's no doubt, despite the rivalry, right?
Yeah.
When I see like a non-ACC team play a Duke, even
Mhm.
right, like in '99, I rooted for Duke against UConn because Duke and UNC makes for a greater we're greater together
than
apart.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that competition is real. Like UNC beat Duke Coach K's last 3 games, like in the tournament and ever, even though Duke had a much superior team because we're that petty, right? But that level of competition adds to the mythological lore, and I think it just underscores how much better the ACC is than any other conference. So no other conference, no other teams have that relationship. And so I'm confident in saying, I don't know who has better, brighter day forward, like in the future, but I think UNC Duke is going to be hard to top as a rivalry.
Sure.
And so I look forward to watching many more games.
Yeah, I agree to a certain degree. I mean, I don't ever root for UNC, even if they're playing.
Oh, can we ask one last question?
Yeah, that's
Andy Kim. You went to Virginia Tech, right?
That's right. Go
when
Hokies.
Tech plays against Duke, who do you root for?
I root for a good game.
Okay.
I root that everyone has a good time.
I went to Georgetown.
Yeah.
And when UNC played Georgetown in the Elite Eight, I wore Carolina blue on the campus of Georgetown.
Wow.
And I rooted for Georgetown.
But this man,
I rooted for Carolina.
Look, this
And
man is
when
he
Duke-
picks and chooses when to be a hardcore UNC guy.
I was a UNC fan in 2001.
Yeah, you
when
are
I
a
was
UNC
third
fan,
wheeling-
quote unquote,
No, I was
in the
third
sense
wheeling.
of
I was with you and a sister that will remain unnamed. All right, it was the worst
man.
case of UNC history. It was with Coach Matt Doherty. We were like less than 500, and that was the heyday of Duke basketball. So it was the easiest time for you to root for Duke, make fun of UNC. I remained a UNC fan, and you gave me the hardest time. We were playing video games at somebody's house, and you were just bandwagoning. But you know what? Now I understand. Now I understand. No, even then I was probably a UNC fan. When we were below 500, Coach Matt Doherty, you guys had won like 2 championships or whatever, and you were just like pummeling. You guys
no,
were crushing
this
us.
man is a guy
Now
who
I
like when
understand.
we're like, oh yeah, Duke
Now
won.
I
It's like,
understand.
hey, congratulations. And then when UNC wins, it's like in your face, as if like
When have I said that in your face?
that's every time we talk about Duke UNC, it's just like you don't care if Duke or UNC loses, but when UNC wins, all of a sudden you are this UNC fan that's like,
I rocked the UNC jersey when Duke was undefeated #1 and Georgetown beat them. There's a picture of me at the Georgetown
That's what I'm
gym
saying.
representing UNC
An
when
idea
UNC
of
was
UNC
bad and Georgetown was good.
been bad.
You don't even root for Duke when they play your alma mater. When they play my alma mater,
I don't
for
root
UNC.
for anyone.
I root for UNC.
those games
good or
don't
bad.
exist.
Good
And
or
I'm
bad.
proud to say that.
Fake games. Yeah.
Not a
Yeah,
true
yeah,
fan. Duke attracts bandwagoner fans unless you went to Duke.
Hey, look, like I said, I may have been a bandwagon.
Thank you.
At one point.
in 95, it's
Sure.
it's like 20 years later, 30 years later. It's like, why? Wait, like,
Everyone starts.
how
with
can you say
bandwagon
you're
fan,
still
right?
a bandwagon? How can you consider that it's still a bandwagon fan? Like, I care more about Duke basketball than a lot of things in my life.
Whether healthy or not, right?
Right?
Well, thanks for that, guys. And I just have one. I made this question thinking you guys would be a lot more at each other's throats, but without repeating
all good.
anything the other person has said today, what is one compliment you guys would like to give to the other team? Just to get this air of camaraderie in here to end the day. Well, let's start with Jay for this one.
I feel like I've already given a lot of credit.
You did.
He
you did.
really
I
has.
made
That's what
it
he always
harder by
does. That's what I'm
without
saying.
repeating.
He's always just like, hey, like, Duke.
No, I
did
try
well,
to
like,
be objective.
Yeah.
And Duke,
No,
Duke
that-
is-
I like that. That was
Duke
very
is
impressive.
an objective assessment of the facts leads me to like UNC much more. But I'm just saying,
okay.
Duke has a lot of great. I mean, Coach K is undisputable what he's done, and I like the way that Duke plays basketball, and I especially like Duke after 2015. But before then, it was very hard for me. Sports was not an escape for me when I watched Duke. It reminded me of all the things why people, I'm just saying.
All right.
The optics was not good.
I don't know if that was a backhanded compliment or what, but there's that. And Andy?
There is absolutely nothing good to say about UNC,
Wow, that's
right? Like,
that's pretty
I
impressive.
think they're just
Irredeemable, huh?
No, he's just playing this role.
there's
not what he believes.
there's just nothing to root for. That what is there to? I think Tyler Hansborough is up there with Christian Laettner and JJ Redick as like.
Nobody would agree with you.
I need to start putting like graphics of who these players are because half the people watching be like,
Nobody knows who
Who
Tyler
are
Hansborough
these
is.
people?
People know
Exactly.
who Christian Laettner is.
Exactly.
People know
That's
who
the power
JJ
of
Redick
Duke.
is.
Exactly.
People know.
That's the power of Duke.
Just go Google Grayson Allen. All right, he's not even the most unlikable.
Yeah, the 3-point percentage leader in the NBA right
he's
now.
like 0 for 20 in the past 3 games. But
Regardless,
watch dirty
he's
plays.
still
Grayson
one of the
Allen.
best 3-point shooters in the NBA.
Grayson Allen is known for dirty plays, like college and NBA. Is that a
He
fact? or
plays
not?
hard.
Okay.
He plays hard.
so you
Some
can't
players who have to get by in the NBA have to play scrappy.
Scrappy is not the right word for hitting people in the.
That's what
Draymond Green
entitled.
type.
That's what
Draymond Green
entitled
people.
basketball fans like to say.
So, so there's really nothing you can say good about UNC, Andy. Come on, Jay's been doing.
You
it
don't
all
like our
day.
colors?
It's
No.
Give us
solid
that.
colors.
The sky is Carolina blue.
It's
God
Their
painted the sky.
mascots. Do you
looks
where-
great
where
to
their
me.
school is? Do you like their coaches, their players?
You know what? I mean, I'm glad that Michael Jordan exists.
Oh, good. Okay. Wow. We got
Um,
somewhere. That was very tangentially related, but
I think I'm glad that I get to wear his shoes. Thank you.
oh, good.
He also wore Vince Carter jerseys, Vince Carter Nike.
That was a
shoes.
gift. I just wore it because I
What about
had
the
to be a
shots?
good friend.
What about the basketball
I think
shoes?
Vince Carter is
did you or did
is
you
one
not
of the
buy-
most scummiest players in the NBA. Look what he did to the
Scummiest?
Raptors.
He's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, because he played for like 50 years.
LeBron James.
This
is the
man
only,
peaked after his
LeBron
third year
James
in
is
the
the
NBA.
only player who's averaged more points after age 40 than Vince Carter.
Again, there's not many players that have played this long.
That should be a compliment.
That just means,
Anyways,
yo, have
you-
better things to do in your life.
did you
You are
purchase-
40 and playing
Did you
basketball.
purchase Vince Carter shoes, or was that a gift?
That was a gift.
And the Vince Carter
And
jersey.
the jersey.
How many pairs of Jordans?
But
do
you
have?
rocked them.
Too many.
Too many.
Thank you.
All right.
Enough to give them that compliment of thank you for Michael Jordan. Although
Makes
I
good
feel like if he
shoes.
went to Duke, it'd be like we'd be talking about LeBron wouldn't
If-
even be in the conversation. I think
if-
Jordan's development at Duke
If it
would
was
have made
little-
him.
If I had $1 million right now,
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing, guys. You know, this was a great time. I really had no idea what to expect, but I really enjoyed talking to you guys, and I really enjoyed not being able to understand half of the players you guys were talking about. But hey, you know what? It's really cool seeing you guys have this long history over, you said, decades of knowing each other, right?
we've been doing this
And-
since high school. 25
Yeah,
years.
yeah. So, you know, I'd love to have you guys back on here, just one-on-one, have that interview, but we'll do it some other time. So thanks everyone for watching this special debate video B-sides episode, and let us know if you like it. We'll try to do some more, and yeah, see you guys later.
Thanks for having us.
Woo.
Go Hokies.